Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be reading some articles out of this new issue of National Geographic History magazine. And as you can see by the title, we are discussing brave women of history, starting with Mary, Queen of Scots. And we will also be reading about the Mirabal sisters, who are national heroes in the Dominican Republic. We'll start with Mary. But these articles were chosen by my channel members. Here she is. These articles were chosen by Sophia, Stardresser, and Luna. Thank you so much for picking these. And if you would like to pick History Magazine articles and get a shout out on my videos, you can click the join button just down there, or the very first link in the description box of any of my videos. Channel memberships are only 99 US cents a month, and you get lots of little perks. You get your name in every single video. You get to watch all of my videos early. You even get to have your own exclusive videos about whatever geography, history, whatever topics you so desire. We had some really good ones recently about like rice farming and indigenous Japanese, like interesting videos over there. So if you would like to join me and all the other channel members, we'd love to have you. But let's talk about Mary Stuart, the tragic Queen. Mary, Queen of Scots. Here we go. Few women in history have inspired as much literature and art as Mary Stuart. Her life has captivated creators across centuries, from Friedrich Schiller's verse play to Gaetano Donizetti's opera, not to mention countless films and biographies. In one biography written by Stefan Zweig, the Austrian author observes that Mary's life and the strength of her character were shaped by the controversy surrounding her since birth. Never was she allowed to develop her ego unhindered. All her life long she would be the pawn of policy, be queen or heiress, ally or foe, never simply child or girl or woman. Mary Stuart has been cast in two opposing roles: martyr in the eyes of Roman Catholics, heretic in those of Anglicans. Paradoxically, the body of evidence about her life obscures rather than clarifies the truth. A childhood in France. From the moment Mary Stuart entered the world, her life was intertwined with the struggle for power. Born in 1542 in Linlithgow Palace, Mary lost her father, James V, just a few days later. The infant queen inherited a realm bloodied by internal clan rivalries and the looming threat of annexation by the English. Before his death, upon hearing he had fathered a daughter, King James reportedly uttered the prophetic words, which I'm not going to try to pronounce that Scottish, but it translates to, "It came with a lass, and it will pass with a lass," foreseeing the crown's loss through a woman. Mary quickly became a political prize for the monarchs of both England and France. Henry VIII, her great-uncle, wanted to marry her to his son, thereby uniting the Tudor and Stuart houses. But Mary's mother, Mary of Guise, a French noblewoman and staunch Catholic, detested the English and favored an alliance with the heir to Henry II of France. So in 1548, at just 5 years old, Mary was sent to France to be raised by the French court. There she received a Renaissance humanist education. So as not to forget her roots, the young Stuart had her own small Scottish court, made up of 2 half-brothers and the so-called Four Marys, girls all close to her in age from noble Scottish families. Celebrated for her beauty and gracious manners, in 1558 Mary married the Dauphin of France at Notre Dame Cathedral. The following year he became the King Francis II, after his father was mortally wounded in a jousting tournament. But the young monarch, who stuttered and was inexperienced in politics, was manipulated by Mary's uncles, the Duke of Guise and the Cardinal of Lorraine, and ruled for only 17 months before his death in 1560. An eventful return to the throne. I'm gonna make this a little more centered. There you go. Here we go. With Francis's passing, Mary returned to Scotland in 1561. In her absence, the Protestant lords of Scotland had revolted against her mother, who had ruled as regent until her death in 1560. Her mom and her husband died the same year. Goodness. Upon arriving in Edinburgh, the young queen, with her French manners and staunch Catholicism, found the country profoundly changed. Scotland had embraced Protestantism, and Mary was now seen as an outsider. Protestant ministers held a majority in her Privy Council, and John Knox, the fiery Calvinist preacher, quickly stirred up public opinion against her. Her only firm ally came from her illegitimate half-brother, Lord James Stuart, later the Earl of Moray. Meanwhile, Elizabeth I, Mary's cousin and the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, had ascended the throne of England. The two women, both unmarried, became the most courted queens in Europe. Both had suitors from Spain, France, Austria, Sweden, and Denmark. A royal marriage could have secured either queen's dominance in the British Isles and Europe. But it was not just the prospect of marriage that placed them at odds. As the granddaughter of Henry VIII's sister, Mary Stuart had a legitimate claim to the English throne should Elizabeth die childless. Also, English Catholics considered the Scottish queen to be their rightful monarch, as they rejected the legitimacy of Elizabeth's birth. Instead of marrying a European prince, a politically advantageous choice, Mary fell in love with the English nobleman Lord Darnley, a Catholic with royal blood, and her cousin. Their marriage in 1565 triggered a storm. The Pope expressed his displeasure at not having been asked for a dispensation. The Earl of Moray betrayed her and led a Protestant uprising. Elizabeth I, alarmed by the implications, regarded the marriage with great suspicion. She had a lot of cousins. I guess royalty back then did, didn't they? A violent end. Darnley was as handsome as he was hot-tempered. Less than a year after their wedding, driven by jealousy, he orchestrated the murder of the Queen's private secretary, David Rizzio. From that moment on, the royal couple lived separate lives. Darnley spent long periods in remote castles far from Edinburgh, while the Queen began to visit the Earl of Bothwell, the leader of her followers, who was recovering from wounds inflicted by border bandits at Hermitage Castle. Rumors soon spread that the two were lovers. Nothing reconciled the royal couple's rift, even the birth of an heir. James, in 1566. Eventually, a group of Catholic nobles, including Bothwell, resolved to eliminate Darnley. He died under mysterious circumstances at Kirkfield Collegiate Church. Although the lords of the council believed that Bothwell was behind the murder, he was acquitted after a trial before Parliament. Just weeks later, he married Mary. This marriage marked another deeply controversial chapter in the Queen's life. As Mary returned to Edinburgh after visiting her son, James, who had been placed at Stirling Castle for his own safety, Bothwell abducted Mary, taking her to Dunbar Castle where, according to witness James Melville, he had ravished her and lain with her against her will. Some argued she colluded with Bothwell to stage her own capture, consummating the union willingly in order to appear forced to marry him, given that a willing marriage to the prime suspect in her husband's death would prove scandalous. Debate still lingers about whether or not the Queen collaborated in her own abduction. The marriage of Mary and Bothwell was both unpopular and disastrous. Catholics considered the marriage illegitimate because the ceremony was conducted according to Protestant rites, and because Bothwell had previously been divorced, yet both Protestants and Catholics found the union highly suspicious. Taking advantage of the situation, the Protestant lords took up arms. In the standoff at Carberry Hill, Mary surrendered, and Bothwell was allowed to leave. He later escaped to Norway. As for Mary, she was captured, imprisoned in Lochleven Castle, and forced to abdicate in favor of her 1-year-old son, while Moray assumed the regency. Imprisonment in England. In 1568, Mary fled to England, hoping that her cousin, Queen Elizabeth, would help restore her to the Scottish throne. This proved a grave miscalculation. Rather than receiving her as a fellow sovereign, Elizabeth had her held captive in a series of castles far from London and the Scottish border, ostensibly while investigating her involvement in Lord Darnley's murder. The legality of this trial remains a subject of debate among experts. Mary refused to testify, declaring that, as a consecrated queen, she could not be judged by any court. The Earl of Moray presented the so-called casket letters, allegedly written by Mary and implicating her in the murder of her second husband. The court, following the instructions of Elizabeth I, neither convicted nor acquitted her. During her long captivity, Mary's supporters plotted to free her. In 1569, Catholic nobles in northern England rebelled, hoping to rescue her, marry her to the Duke of Norfolk, and restore Catholicism to the country. The revolt failed. Beginning in 1571, Philip II of Spain explored the idea of his illegitimate half-brother, Don Juan of Austria, marrying Mary. Juan, a military commander in the Spanish Netherlands, just over the sea from England, and Mary would pose a direct threat to Elizabeth, but the plan fell through. Mary became involved in these and other plots, communicating with her supporters through coded letters smuggled in leather pouches hidden inside beer barrel stoppers. Death on the scaffold. In 1586, Elizabeth's head of intelligence, Sir Francis Walsingham, who was well aware of these machinations, uncovered a plot led by the Catholic Anthony Babington to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. Mary's enemies had long awaited the opportunity to accuse her of high treason. The conspirators were arrested and executed, and Mary was brought before a hastily convened tribunal, which would conclude with her death sentence. The execution took place on February 8, 1587, in the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. She was 44. Contemporary chronicles recorded her final moments, last prayers, the will she dictated, and the crimson color of her dress, which evoked the blood of martyrs. She faced the axe with serenity. Now in death, Mary Stuart achieved the fame and legacy that eluded her in life. Her tragic end became the true beginning of her legend. This last page here, which I'm not going to read because it's just one long quote. This was the letter she wrote to the Pope when she heard that she was going to be executed. It's pretty neat to see the Vatican seal right there. There's the Pope she wrote it to, Pope Sixtus V. It's a depiction of her putting her head on the chopping block and her mates being like, oh man. I feel bad, huh, Jet? Like, you keep her locked up in a castle for so long. Of course she's going to try to conspire to escape, right? Like, I felt like it was, they just locked her up so that she could plot to escape, so then they could catch her and then execute her because they couldn't get her on the murder charges, right? Let's see what this says. Mary Stuart expressly requested that 4 male attendants and 2 of her ladies accompany her to the execution, as shown in this portion the 19th century oil painting by Abel de Pujol, I think. This is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Valenciennes, France. This is Bolton Castle, where Mary was held. One of the places where Mary was held. Hopefully you can see. There we go. Another painting here. Death draws near. Mary Stuart in her final hours before stepping onto the scaffold. This is by Philippe Jacques von Bray from the 19th century, and it's located at the Louvre in Paris. And there's a famous portrait here of Elizabeth I. This is located at Hatfield House in Hertfordshire, England. Let's read this about the casket letters. During the inquiry in England about the murder of Mary's second husband, Lord Darnley, it was her own half-brother, I guess it wasn't her cousin, her half-brother, the Earl of Moray, who presented 8 unsigned letters, allegedly written by Mary to her lover, the Earl of Bothwell. These letters, he claimed, proved her involvement in Darnley's murder. Moray said he had discovered them in a silver casket bearing the coat of arms of Francis II of France. The judges accepted Mary as the author of the letters, but she denounced them as forgeries. Today, most historians believe that the so-called casket letters were likely fabricated by Moray, who was serving as regent of Scotland and sought to block Mary's return to power. The original French letters were lost, but French transcripts and English and Scottish Gaelic translations had already been made. There's the casket. This is in the National Museums of Scotland in Edinburgh. Now this is interesting. Attack on the King Consort. See this drawing here. Shortly after the murder of Lord Darnley, Mary Stuart's second husband, this drawing was crafted to illustrate the circumstances of the crime. The murder took place at Kirkfield, a Catholic church in Edinburgh that would fall into disrepair following the Protestant Reformation. You can see here, it was a big ruined church. In early 1567, Darnley was staying at the old provost's lodging on the church's grounds. In the early hours of February 10th, the house was destroyed by an explosion, reportedly caused by a barrel of gunpowder, though it is likely that the building was mined. You can see over here, it blew up. They're like, wow, that's a lot of rubble where this house was mined, reducing it to rubble. The lifeless bodies of Darnley and his servant Taylor were later found on the other side of a wall, untouched by the blast. You can see them here. And what's interesting, this doesn't talk about the clothes scattered around, and like they're only wearing shirts, no pants. There's a random chair and a random knife. Interesting. And here's the wall. Mystery. There were no visible injuries from the explosion, suggesting they had likely fled from their bedchambers and been strangled nearby. The drawing depicts Taylor's burial, which you can see right here. They're burying poor Taylor. The burial of Taylor, the king's servant. And the transfer of Darnley's body. there he goes. With all these people watching, I guess. Did it say the Kirk of Field Kirkyard? The house in which the king was kept after the murders, right here. Interesting. In the upper left corner, Darnley and Mary Stuart's young son, the future James VI of Scotland and James I of England, cries out from his bed, "Judge and revenge my cause, O Lord." Now says he would have been nearly 8 months old at this time, so he did not look like this, and he could not talk. But interesting. They're depicting him. Revenge my dad. Here's Edinburgh Castle, for the city of Edinburgh here. Like, very, very iconic site there, Edinburgh in Scotland. Here's Lord Darnley and Mary Stuart. This is an enhanced engraving. Here's John Knox, leader of the Protestant Reformation of Scotland, Mary Stuart's fiercest opponent. This is a painting here, which I think it talks about in here, of her reciting a speech in Latin to Henry II over here. I wonder if this is Francis here, being like, that's my future wife. This is an oil painting by Gio Saint-Evre from 1836. This is located at the Palace of Versailles. See this over here, a bronze medal celebrating marriage between Francis, Dauphin of France, and Mary I of Scotland. This is the Star of the Court of the Valois. In France, Mary of Scotland became part of the refined court of the Valois, where the ideals of medieval chivalry blended with the humanist culture of the Renaissance. There she studied classical languages, Latin and some Greek, as well as modern languages, especially Spanish and Italian. At the age of 13, she delivered a speech in Latin of her own composition before the courtiers at the Louvre. Inspired by her humanist education in France and the works of Erasmus, she defended women's access to literature and the liberal arts. She sang and danced with grace, hunted, and was an elegant equestrian. Mary's presence was further enhanced by her remarkable beauty. Her towering, slender figure, she stood about 5 feet 11 inches tall. Taller than me, my goodness. I'm 5'8.5". Goodness. Red hair and amber eyes. In an ode to the young Queen of Scots, the humanist poet Pierre de Ronsard wrote, "Au belle et plus que belle et agréable à voir," highlighting her immense beauty. The beautiful is more beauty and the agreeable aurora, I think. Anyway, the emblem of the Scottish royal families right here. In use since at least the 13th century, it features a red rampant lion with claws and a blue tongue. Here's Lithgow Palace, where she was born. Does it say James V was also born here? And then here are her parents, James V and Mary of Guise. Here's a pendant with a cameo of Mary I. I'm guessing that's Mary, Queen of Scots, I assume. This is in the National Museums of Scotland. And here's this beautiful portrait we saw on the cover of the magazine. This is by an unknown 19th century French artist, and it's located at the Voronezh Regional Art Museum in Russia. Really pretty. Tragic story. This other story we're going to hear is also very tragic. Let me get the article right here. 3 brave sisters who defied a dictator. On November 25th, 1960, a vehicle went over the side of a mountain in the Dominican Republic, falling 150 feet. It appeared to be an accident, just the latest in a string of mysterious car crashes. However, the crash was no accident, and the passengers were no ordinary citizens. They were Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa Mirabal, sisters and political activists who dared to speak out against dictator Rafael Trujillo's brutal regime. They were killed by Trujillo's henchmen in what was made to look like a crash, much like other incidents that led to the deaths of other political opponents of Trujillo's. Known as Las Mariposas, which means the butterflies, the Mirabal sisters became national heroines, and their tragic deaths inspired international outrage and an official designation by the United Nations General Assembly that November 25th be the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Jaguar is now gently pawing my leg because he wants to go play with toys. Dude, we're working right now. You gotta wait, my love. I'm sorry to say. Just a little bit more, Jojo. Life under authoritarianism. The sisters grew up in a prosperous family in Ojo de Agua, near Salcedo, where they attended Catholic school and had ordinary childhoods. However, like other Dominicans during the early 20th century, their lives were also affected by colonization and political upheaval. The turmoil began in 1916, when the United States occupied the Dominican Republic amid fears that Germany might use the strategically located island nation during World War I as a military base for an attack. The U.S. withdrew in 1924, and Horacio Vázquez was elected president, but civil unrest grew under his corrupt rule, and he was overthrown in 1930. I have to make sure my cat knows I hear him, otherwise he'll start biting my leg. Okay. Soon after, military commander Rafael Trujillo became president in a rigged election. The Dominican Republic's new dictator, known as El Jefe, which means the boss, became all-powerful, controlling every aspect of government and purging his rivals. Patria, the eldest sister, was only 13 years old when Trujillo instigated a massacre. I know, sweet boy, hold on. It's estimated that 9,000 to 30,000 Haitians and Dominicans of Haitian descent were killed. From then on, the girls grew up in a society in which publicly questioning Trujillo's rule was dangerous, even deadly. The sisters resist. As Trujillo's rule became more brutal, women from the middle and upper classes began criticizing and actively resisting the regime. Many went into exile, where they continued their resistance from abroad. In 1949, the Mirabal sisters found themselves caught in the dictator's crosshairs after a social event that was said to be designed to introduce beautiful unmarried Minerva to Trujillo. He was notorious for using his political power to pressure young women into sexual relationships, and when Minerva refused his advances, Trujillo took swift revenge. The result was a sheer calamity for the Mirabal family, who were subsequently harassed, imprisoned, and ostracized by their neighbors, historian Nancy Robinson writes, noting that the regime disrupted the sisters' educations and professional opportunities, imprisoned their father, and reduced the family to financial ruin. This would be a good movie, wouldn't it? The Mirabal sisters. In response, Minerva, Maria Teresa, and Patria began working with a growing political opposition. Their fourth and youngest sister, Dede, remained in the background. Their efforts took on new urgency after a failed coup on June 14, 1959, which led the government to crack down on opponents. The sisters and their husbands helped organize the 14th of June movement, a national opposition effort in memory of the dissidents who had led the coup. Codenamed Las Mariposas, the sisters collected arms and supplies, distributed anti-Trujillo pamphlets, and organized resistance cells across the country. When their activities were discovered, they were harassed, imprisoned, and tortured. Nevertheless, the Mirabal sisters, along with their husbands, stood firm. They possessed extraordinary political and military lucidity and were prepared to lay down their lives, wrote Minerva's daughter, Minu Tavares Mirabal, in an edition of the Letters to Minerva Mirabal and Manolo Tavares. How they became heroines. Ironically, the regime's treatment of the Mirabal sisters and other women of the resistance helped fan the flames of the movement, writes historian Elizabeth Manley, which drew significant national and international attention to the dictator's crumbling political drama. Though his actions were opposed by a growing number of Dominicans and even the Catholic Church, which publicly condemned him in 1960 after years of supporting the regime, Trujillo held a grudge against the sisters, declaring them his main enemies. On November 25, 1960, the sisters were on their way home from visiting the prison where two of their husbands were being held, when Trujillo's thugs intercepted their chauffeured car. The men beat and suffocated them and their driver to death, then staged the car crash. Although the Trujillo regime claimed the sisters had died in an accident, Dominicans at home and abroad knew they had been murdered, and the women immediately became national heroes. Just 6 months later, Trujillo met a similar fate when he was assassinated by dissidents who intercepted him when he was on his way to visit his mistress. The sisters' murderers were arrested, convicted, and imprisoned. However, they didn't serve out their sentences, in part because of political instability. Their memory lives on. The Mirabal sisters became national icons. 2 of their children went on to serve in the Dominican government, and the sisters became national symbols of bravery and resistance. Their faces appear on Dominican currency, and the way they lived their lives served as inspiration for the popular 1994 novel In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. Maybe that was made into a movie. I should look that up. Today, the Mirabal sisters are remembered for their courage under a totalitarian regime and as victims of the horrific violence that women continue to face worldwide. In 1981, a group of Latin American and Caribbean feminists began celebrating the day of the sisters' death as a holiday commemorating all victims of femicide. In 2000, the United Nations followed suit. November 25th is now the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, a day for awareness and remembrance of those killed and harmed by gender-based violence. Much remains to be done, but we have also achieved a great deal, said Minerva's daughter Minu, a politician, during a 2006 speech. Along that journey, Minerva, Patria, and Maria Teresa have been with us, giving legitimacy to our fight. Here we see a picture of a memorial walk, I think, for International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. She's turned this lady to a butterfly. You can see the coin that the sisters appear on down here. It's a 25-cent coin in the Dominican Republic. Big water tower here, which I'm only going to read part of this because it repeats a lot of what we just read. It says, the water tower located on the western outskirts of Salcedo, where the sisters grew up, represents the significance of the Mirabal sisters' contributions to their country, as do other murals throughout the Dominican Republic, which we'll see on this page over here. You can see this memorial here. This is at their museum, which it talks about down here. The Mirabal Sisters House Museum. Las Mariposas, as the Mirabal sisters were often called, were well-known symbols of democratic and feminist resistance who paid the ultimate price for their activism. Not to be forgotten, however, is the fourth sister, Dede, who, until she died in 2014, worked to preserve the memory of Minerva, Maria Teresa, and Patria Mirabal. Dede, who was less active in the movement, established a foundation and a museum in what once served as their family home to honor their legacy, La Casa Museo Hermanas Mirabal, the Mirabal Sisters House Museum. Within the walls, where the sisters spent their final years, are artifacts that harken back to the time when they helped grow the movement that fought against the regime and Trujillo. During his more than 3 decades of rule, the people of the Dominican Republic were oppressed. An essential outcome of the sisters' resistance was the attention brought to gender-based violence. And there's an obelisk here. It says was originally erected to honor Trujillo, it says, and now it's been painted with the sisters on it. How wonderful is that? But that is the end of our video for tonight. Thank you so much to my channel members who requested these articles. And if you would like to be one of those channel members, you can click the join button right down there. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and let me know all your thoughts down below in the comments. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a good night. Jet Jaguar fell asleep over there. He couldn't wait anymore. My poor boy. Good night.